Hello and welcome to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy,
And I'm Claire.
and we're here to talk about some of the disturbing things that go on in the world, past and present. We feel like not knowing doesn't mean the crazy doesn't exist.
So we're going to scar you with the knowing.
Enjoy.
So what do you got for us today, Claire?
Oh, I had to pull it up.
You ain't ready yet?
You know what I did miss? I don't have anything for you to do any guessing.
I'm shocked. I am distraught. My world has done come crashing down. I'm gonna shed a tear over here.
Where were we last week?
Virginia. Well, so yours is out of order.
I'll just screw it.
Hang on, I'll look. Hold your pantyhose. Let's see. Dick is next. Then it's I didn't intend to kill. Let's see, where was that? Leicester, England is where we were last week.
Well, we're not going there this week. Somehow, I thought we were in Illinois last week. I guess not, but...
So you thought we was in Illinois last week because our cases are recorded out of order, and mine that isn't going to release for another 2 weeks, I think, is in Illinois. Way to ruin the surprise for our fans, Claire.
Technically, you did. You could have just left it as I don't remember anything.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we're headed to Palatine, Illinois in 1993. We're going to start off on a Friday night, January 8th of 1993, when Manny Castro pulls into a parking lot of Brown's Chicken and Pasta restaurant, where his 16-year-old son Michael works. It's about 11 p.m. and the restaurant closes at 9, and his son hadn't been home yet. So he's a concerned Papa Bear, so he heads over to see what's going on and why his son's not home yet. He sees that his son's truck is still in the parking lot and gets a little annoyed. The restaurant lights are out already, so he figures his son went somewhere after work and forgot to let him or his mom know. So he heads the few blocks back home to wait for Michael to turn up and probably give him an earful for not letting anybody know what he was doing. But after a bit more waiting back home and still no Michael, Manny heads back up to the restaurant and still no Michael.
I would be pissed.
I feel like he probably is.
And I wouldn't have gone home. I'm just saying. I don't know what I would have done, but I would have been pissed.
I feel like since this is the pre-teenager cell phone era...
What year is this?
93.
Okay.
He doesn't have a cell phone, so on the off chance he heads home with his buddy or anything like that, since they're not that far from the restaurant, it doesn't seem like... And it was a Friday night, so it's not like it'd be a big deal if he got his car Saturday or anything like that, or if he... So I think that's why he goes home, because if he stays at the restaurant, he doesn't know if his son is up home, and he'd be more pissed if he got home after sitting at the restaurant for a while, and then he ended up coming home with a friend.
Yeah. I totally would have sent my kid back with the friend to the restaurant to go get your father.
Well, assuming his mom was still awake.
I know if my kid didn't come home from work, you said it's like 9 o'clock.
Okay, hold up. Before you even get on that spiral, you're telling me you haven't plopped down on a Friday night and passed out accidentally before 9?
Not when I'm worried about one of my kids, no.
You wouldn't be worried at that point because the restaurant doesn't close till 9. So clearly closing activities and everything, it's not alarming around 10 when he's not home. It's more of 11. You could have been asleep.
I don't know.
But anyway, Manny heads back up to the restaurant and still no Michael. So he decides to drive around checking other fast food places to find where that boy could possibly be, but still doesn't find him. Michael happens to work with his 17-year-old pal, Rico Salas. So that's partially why Manny figured he might have left work to do something with his pal, seeing as it was a Friday night and all.
Mm-hmm. Boys off being boys.
Yeah, so Manny would head back home again, where this time he would get a call from Rico's mom, panicked because he hasn't come home either, and she was hoping that he was there with Michael.
Does Rico drive? Because was his car at the restaurant?
Yes, he does. Rico and his mom had only been in the United States for about 8 months, and he never did anything without letting his mom know, and certainly has never just not come home. They'd moved to the U.S. from the Philippines to escape the violence their life was there. His dad was stabbed to death just 5 years earlier when he was 12, and that's why they wanted to leave all that, and because the fear his mother had is why he was always checking in. He wouldn't have just gone and been a teen and disappeared.
Oh my gosh, is he dead? If the boys are dead, she's gonna be crushed.
Shh. Manny would get off the phone with Rico's mom and call the police. It's now 11:45.
Oh my God.
Manny and his wife drive back to the restaurant and are met by the police officer. Now, the police officer tells them that, the boys are probably just out being teenage boys and not to fear, that they'll pop back up. It's okay. Tries to reassure them the best he can before driving off. The officer would report to his supervisor that he tried the restaurant doors. They were all locked. Everything appears perfectly fine outside the restaurant. Looks like a normal closed business. But Manny isn't just gonna go home and wait. His son was responsible, dreamed of being a Marine one day. It was totally out of character for him to just go off without a word.
That's gotta be frustrating, though. Like, when you know that your kid is not one of these kids that just takes off and the police are just like, oh, it's just, they're being a normal teen. No, I know my kid. This isn't normal.
Yeah.
That's gotta be the most frustrating thing ever.
Well, so instead, Manny heads to the police station and reports his son missing, knowing in his gut that something is wrong, and he really just wants somebody to hear him out. So by 12:21 a.m., another officer pulls into the restaurant parking lot, but he pulls in because there's somebody walking around the outside of the building, so it's more of a, he's going to go check out what that feller's doing walking around a building that's been closed, and it's now 12:21. So he goes over there to check that out, identifies the man as Pedro Maldonado, who was looking for his brother, who was the cook at the restaurant, 46-year-old Guadalupe. Now, Pedro explains to the officer that his brother is usually home by 9:30 at the latest, and he and Guadalupe's wife were really worried about why he wasn't home yet. Now, Pedro was worried that maybe it was discovered that Guadalupe's papers weren't correctly done and he was being deported, so that's why he's panicky. He's especially nervous because Pedro sees that his brother's car is still in the parking lot and was in the process of peeking in the restaurant when the officer pulled in, but the lights inside were all out, so he couldn't really see a whole lot. Now, the officer tries to calm the fears of Pedro, tells him that maybe he went out for a drink or a sandwich with one of the other employees, and again, it's a Friday night, so anything's possible.
Is this the same officer?
No, it's a different one. That's why I said another officer happens to be I figure he's just on his little beat and sees somebody.
Spotted somebody prowling around, decided to stop.
Yeah, and peeking in a restaurant window, so he's going to go just see what you're up to.
Yeah.
But Pedro isn't having the excuse of maybe he went out for a drink or a sandwich with somebody. He tells the officer that not only does Guadalupe not drink the devil's juice, he loves being home to tuck in his 3 boys, and his car is still in the parking lot. Now, the officer tells him, just head on home. He's probably there any minute, if not already there.
How? His truck is there.
That's what I think Pedro also, with the whole fear of, he thinks he'll be deported if they push too hard, or I don't know if their paperwork was legitimate or not, or it's just the fear of maybe it isn't.
That's gotta suck.
So he doesn't want to get in any trouble, so I feel like he doesn't push too hard. And maybe his car had a breakdown thing, and you can't visually tell that from it being in the parking lot, so maybe he caught a ride.
Yeah, but it sounds like the parking lot's pretty full.
Right? I was like,
for a closed restaurant, so far that's 3 vehicles that don't belong there after hours.
Pedro would do as he was told and head home for a sleepless night of worry. 3 a.m. rolls around and Manny heads back to the restaurant. He would run into the officer that had sent Pedro home. The 2 men start trying the doors and windows of the restaurant to gain entry, because I feel like that second officer is like, this is a little weird because that's 3 people that should be home and they're not.
That's why I asked, is that the same officer? Because eventually somebody's got to run into the same officer, and that officer is going to be like,
something's
you know what?
Got to be weird. You can't just keep saying it's a Friday night.
Right, because here we are. It's now Saturday morning.
Yeah. So they start trying the doors and the windows to gain access to the restaurant, but it's locked. That one's locked. This one's locked. Then they come to an employee entrance and give that a yank. The door swings wide open, which was not expected by either man, because you figure that first officer said he tried all the doors. Now, just inside the door, Manny sees Michael's jacket still hung up on the little peg. And mind you, it's January and it's cold, so his dad's like, he wouldn't have gone anywhere without his jacket. The 2 step inside, and that's when Officer Connolly sees an arm poked out of a freezer door, half propping the door open and blood pooling on the tile underneath it.
Oh, gosh.
Manny hadn't yet seen what the officer could see, and the officer tries blocking him from going past, trying to get him back outside, telling him, "This is a crime scene, get out." Then he radios for help. 2 fire engines, an ambulance, 2 paramedics, and a police squad, and a shift commander would eventually get out there. The officers head in to get an idea what they have. They'll find 5 bodies in the walk-in freezer.
Oh my gosh.
2 more in the cooler. Each one they would check for signs of life, hoping for a faint pulse. And with each one, it yielded the same results. They're all dead.
Oh my God.
There would be a total of 7 people murdered that day. 3 fathers, a middle-aged mother of 3 girls, a twin brother, a high school senior, and a high school junior. Now, it's assumed at this point that it's a burglary gone horribly wrong. The Illinois Crime Lab would send out experts to handle the crime scene and start processing all the things. They would arrive just before 4 a.m., which, in consideration of, it was, 3 a.m., they were moving a lot of people in there very fast, as they should.
Yeah, especially for the wee hours.
Right. People are getting woke up out of bed of, there's a humongous thing that happened. We got to get to the bottom of this ASAP.
Yeah, all hands on deck.
Yeah. Now, during the hours of processing the scene, the restaurant phone would ring. Now, mind you, it's still the wee hours of the morning, so an officer picks it up, and it's a reporter asking what's going on because they heard something on their police scanner. The officer just fucking hangs that shit up, doesn't even say a peep, and I was like, for good. What? They're just worried about a story, and here they're trying to figure out what the fuck happened to 7 loved ones.
They're trying to deal with some devastation.
Right. Now 5:30 rolls around, and Pedro is pulling back into the parking lot and sees all the people around the restaurant and immediately knows this isn't good. There's reporters, there's family members waiting to hear if their loved one was inside. Pedro hears that there's a dead man from someone in the crowd and assumes it's his brother. Then another man says he fears the victim is his 16-year-old son. Now, mind you, everybody has been up all night and just wants to know what the hell is going on. But it would be several hours before they would identify victims in the freezer as 49-year-old store owner Lynn Ellenfeld, 47-year-old fry cook Guadalupe Maldonado, 16-year-old cashier Michael Castro, 17-year-old cashier Rico Salas, and 31-year-old manager in training Marcus Nelson. Now, the victims in the cooler were 50-year-old owner Richard Ellenfeld, which is married to Lynn, and 32-year-old chicken breader Tom Minez.
Wait, what?
I didn't know that was a job position, by the way, so I'm glad you did the whole what?
You like those jobs, the weird ones.
The chicken breader.
Like squirrel hunters, mushroom hunters, chicken breader. All right.
I guess if you're at a chicken place, I guess it makes sense because you're churning out a lot of chickens, so you need somebody doing that job.
Makes sense. I remember way back in the day, I used to have to do the onion rings when I worked at Sonic years. And
you were an onion ringer?
I was an onion ring breader. Dipper?
Put that on your resume.
I sure won't. Then my husband's going to want everything fried. Sorry.
But the walk-in freezer that was propped open by the arm, the victims were riddled with bullets, and some also had knife wounds. Now, some of the victims were slouched where they had been shot. Some were huddled together in an effort to protect themselves and each other, which was super sad.
That is awful.
Now, soon a priest would show up, and they would take Pedro to the station to break the news to him that his brother was among the victims. Now, he would have to go home and tell Guadalupe's wife, which is full of sobs before breaking the news to the sons. Juan was 13, Javier was 10, and then 5-year-old Salvador would be told that their daddy wouldn't be coming home anymore. Now, at that point, a conference room at the police station would become the hub of the investigation. The room next door to it was where they were breaking the news to friends and family and victims and all that. And I can't imagine trying to work to solve a case and being next door to hearing all the sobbing on the other side. Talk about the pressure.
But then again, maybe that'll help.
I don't know. I feel like if I'm trying to focus on something and I hear wailing in the next room, it's going to shatter every bit of concentration.
Yeah.
But it's not long before the news is reporting on the tragedy that has occurred, and the crowd would just keep growing. Before long, psychics would start calling in, and generally all the quacks start, calling to help. Exes would want to say that they think their ex did it, and there were several ladies willing to turn in their significant others. Blah, blah, blah.
Wow. The good old 90s.
I was like, fuck, man. Like, an overwhelming number of people would call.
I don't know which is more disturbing.
I don't know. Illinois seems to be full of quacks. Now, the sun would start to set when bodies would finally start being removed from the restaurant. They had to wait until all the photographs had been taken and the scene videotaped before they removed anybody. Now, each zipped in a body bag as family and onlookers watch, uncertain which one is their person. Still not being told what happened, why, I can't imagine spending the entire day and nothing. Other than your family member is dead, you just don't know how the fuck did that happen? What happened in there?
It makes me wonder, did that officer really check all the doors, or was there possibly the bad guy still inside, and after the officer left, he ran out?
I guess anything's possible. I feel like he tried the front door, maybe the side door, but didn't walk all the way around.
Yeah.
So he didn't realize there was another door, which means he really didn't try too hard. And I think because it looked so normal other than a parking lot full of vehicles.
That's not normal.
Right. Because you figure, let's assume the owners, husband and wife, took one vehicle. I mean, there's so many vehicles in that parking lot that should not be there.
Well, I mean, I could understand one, maybe two, but...
Everybody.
How many victims total? You said there were 7?
7. So let's be conservative and say 5 vehicles are sitting there. That's a lot of vehicles for a restaurant
that's closed
after hours. Well, the police would find a small amount of money hidden in the back of the safe of the restaurant. The safe key was still on the loop of coiled plastic hanging from the lock and was usually worn on Lynn's wrist. Detectives would pull the register tapes and find that $1,800 is missing and is definitely making it appear like a botched robbery. Then in the midst of all the super helpful psychic help, they get a weird call from a gal with her sister by her side about a feller that was recently fired from the restaurant, and he was super disgruntled and even threatened revenge. He was their friend, 23-year-old Martin Blake. He also owned a .22 caliber gun that he was test firing down his hallway of his house into some phone books.
He definitely did it.
So he's looking pretty good also to the officers. And apparently when he saw the news about the owners among the casualties, he thought it was hilarious.
Yep, he's guilty.
Even weirder than that, he dated Michael Castro's sister, Mary Jane, who had worked at the restaurant before the Ellenfelds bought it, and Michael had been shot and stabbed.
Interesting.
Now, it would be weeks of evidence collecting and processing. They would take out counters, tabletops, the door that was left unlocked. They would dust and lift all the prints that they could find, hoping for a lead with each piece they took out. They would find a faint imprint of a Nike Air Force shoe print that was about a size 12 to 14. They dug bullets from the walls and later from the bodies. Even a partially eaten chicken dinner that was found in the trash in the front dining area. They froze in case maybe it was from the people or person responsible. And now, the reason for taking the chicken is they weren't hungry, but the restaurant closed at 9, right? Mm-hmm. But the last meal of the day was rung up at 9:08 and was a chicken dinner and a drink. It also appeared all the closing duties were already done, so the trash was already pulled. So this was the only thing in the trash. So that's why they were figuring it looks pretty good that it could be the last person who ate there.
Interesting.
So one of the detectives would set up a bulletproof vest in the freezer and put sound meters outside, and he would fire a variety of weapons just to see if you could hear anything outside. But when you're inside the walk-in freezer, you couldn't hear anything from outside. So unfortunately, that means you're not going to have anybody who heard any shots. They would also stumble on the fact that when the killer left, they hit the circuit breaker to kill the lights, which was a stumper for the detectives because you would think if the robbery went bad, it would make someone want to go out in a hurry and not bother hunting for a circuit breaker for the lights when the light switch was an option. So they're thinking that maybe it was someone familiar with the restaurant rather than a random person on the prowl.
Wow.
So the detectives go to talk to that disgruntled former employee Martin. And turns out a friend would let him know that the police were looking to talk to him, in particular about how he was hostile and revenge-seeking kind of former employee. So he knows that they're coming to talk to him. He just doesn't expect it when they pull in outside of his house that Saturday afternoon at about 3 p.m. over a dozen police officers would surround him with their guns drawn, cuff him, and cart him off before he can really wrap his head around the whole thing. His ass is just gone. They snatched him up so fast, the hood of his car was still up when they disappeared him.
Wow.
Yeah. And he's all like, is this about last night? And I didn't do it.
Sure.
I was out drinking with my friends, 4 or 5 of them. We drank and got high.
Sure.
No, they would talk to his friends and they would say that they watched a movie from like 7 to 9 and then went home.
All right. That's very different stories.
What?
He's saying they went out drinking and they're saying they watched a movie. That's very different activities.
Well, it ends up being a case of whatever all they run down, he couldn't have done it. So after being held and interrogated for 48 hours, they release him before they conclude that it's not their guy. So they're back to the drawing board.
You know, when I said he done it, I heard you freaking smile. I heard the smile.
So they're back to the drawing board.
Stop smiling.
They interview former staff and all of that, thinking still that it has to be somebody who's disgruntled. Now, by January 12th, the FBI is hot on the scene, bringing it to 102 investigators on the case. Over 21 police forces that are collaborating to try to get this thing closed.
That's insane. That's a lot.
Yeah. But even with the addition of more people and more technology, the investigation drags on for weeks that turns to months, then into years.
Oh my God.
Mind you, they're running down every tip that comes in, and each one turns up nothing.
Wow.
It would be nearly a decade before a gal would come forward with information about who did it. Anne Lockett. She would provide the names of 20-year-old Jim Degorski and 18-year-old Juan Luna. Now, Anne used to date Jim. She would say that he called her that night. He would tell her to watch the news and that he did something big.
Ew.
Then a few days later, when she's hanging out in Jim's room at his mom's house, is where he'll tell her details. So detectives would piece together a version of events from what they're told and what the scene looked like and blah, blah, blah. A story, by the way, that Jim will claim is not true.
Of course.
But here we go. We'll start with Friday, like 4-ish, on January 8th. 17-year-old Rico evidently was planning on quitting the restaurant soon. He hated working near the grease and felt that no matter how much he cleaned, he felt that the splatter was always on him, and he just hated working in fat.
You know what it is?
He kept getting acne from all the oil.
Yeah, his skin kept breaking out.
So he applied to a hardware store because he wanted to make more money. He wanted to fix up his car and preferably at a job he didn't hate. Now, the owners were aware that Rico wasn't a happy employee, so they promote him to front store with the promise of more hours. So Rico isn't initially on the schedule that doomful Friday, but when he stops in to grab his check, there's a 17-year-old purdy gal named Casey. She hasn't had a Friday night off in ages, and since Rico wants more hours, it seems like a perfect plan for him to work in her place, and then she can have the night off, and they're both thrilled for that. Now, mind you, during that little time shift swap, 16-year-old Michael comes in, and he's thrilled because his pal is Rico, and what better than to work a Friday night with your pal? Now, 23-year-old Martin Blake would come in, that fired feller, and grab his last check, but he's in and out of there. And things are like normal, trickling in, shifts starting, that kind of evening. Now, Richard and Lynn, they worked tirelessly on the restaurant because they really hadn't owned it for very long, and they poured everything financially and physically working into that restaurant. Their daughters, Joy, Jennifer, and Dana, usually worked in the restaurant as well. Now, their youngest had just graduated high school, and where Lynn didn't mind hitting the grind for their success, she didn't want the restaurant to suck their daughters' lives into it. So, she was fine with a 16-hour day, but she didn't want her girls to be working that hard.
Right, you want better.
She wanted them to enjoy life and being young to a certain point.
Yeah.
So Lynn would let her middle daughter, Dana, have the night off, so she would work for her instead. Dana was apparently supposed to go back to college soon to finish out her senior year, and her boyfriend had stopped by earlier at the restaurant because he told her that he wanted to take Dana to dinner to meet his parents. Now, mind you, side note, they end up getting married, so I think that was like a precursor to that whole thing, and I think he communicated to Lynn that that was his
goal.
He wanted her to meet his mom and dad. So she's like, absolutely. Who wouldn't let their daughter have the night off to go meet your boyfriend's parents?
Unless you don't like the boyfriend.
Well, that wasn't the case. So she's like, yeah, go have dinner. Enjoy the night. I'll work. It's fine. And again, nothing odd. Business as usual. The night would start just the same. The usual high school crowd that would trickle in for quick bites to eat. And as 9 p.m. approaches, the crowd dwindles. They start doing the closing stuff. Everything's practically done. They're just waiting for 9 o'clock. When in walk Juan and Jim, they open the door, stroll in. And the Ellenfelds had a habit of they wouldn't turn away a paying customer because, again, this is new for them owning it. So it's just like they're not turning away money. So if somebody trickles in the door, they're going to serve their customer. Now, even if that happened to technically be after they were supposed to be closed. Now, Jim was a troublemaker. In the 90s, he would break into a construction trailer and torch it. He would get a year of suspension when he gets caught. Oh, I'm sorry. He would get a year of supervision when he gets caught. When that's over, he gets caught with a stolen vehicle. 8 months before the restaurant murders, he's convicted and given probation for beating up his girlfriend and binding her up with duct tape and not letting her go because she wanted to break up with him.
All right.
Now, Jim and Juan were high school pals that hung out all the time. Generally, if you saw Jim, you saw Juan. Now, they would do their drinking and smoking pot and just pretty much burnouts who would also burn through job after job after job because they're delinquent pieces of shit. They would also snatch up neighborhood cats, I don't know if they're strays or anybody's pets, and torture and kill them.
These are some real high-class fellers you got.
So Jim and Juan would head out that night wearing old clothes, head over to the restaurant with pockets full of ammo. Now, Juan used to work at the restaurant, but it was before the Ellenfelds bought it, so Lynn wouldn't have recognized him that night, but he was familiar with the place. And would you believe it? He was actually interviewed during the initial investigation as a former employee.
Oh.
He would get a call from the police department requesting an interview for him and head down there with Anne because Jim told her to go with him, so it seemed more legitimate. Now, Juan is photographed and questioned for less than half an hour before they moved to the next ex-employee. He would even tell Anne that was easy as they headed out. So back to that evening, Jim and Juan would go in pretending to be customers. Juan had a piece of wood that he shoved under the back door to wedge it shut so nobody could push out from the inside, obviously to prevent anybody's escape during their impending robbery. They would finish their chicken, chunk it into the trash, go to the bathroom where they would put on gloves. The rest is kind of fuzzy in terms of what order everything happens, but investigators believe that the two fellers marched in, fired a shot to get attention, then ordered some employees in the walk-in freezer, others in the cooler at gun and knife point. They assume Pedro resisted, which is why he had cuts to his arms. It was also assumed that Lynn may have fought, or maybe she wasn't quick enough with opening the safe because she would end up with her throat slashed. Then the shooting would start, and people laid dying. One would vomit on the floor, which was something that authorities wouldn't release, but would be a detail that Anne would give police as proof that the boys' confessions to her were legitimate. They were so sick that after shooting Michael twice in the shoulder and once in the chest, one of them stabbed him in the stomach. A total of 21 bullets would be shot that night. Mind you, the .38 caliber gun that was used only holds 6 shots, so they had to reload at least 3 times. That's 3 times they had an opportunity to reconsider the slaughter they were doing. Then they mopped up some of the blood inside.
That's disgusting.
They also carefully wiped down where they touched, careful to remove any potential fingerprints they left before they donned their gloves. They even collected the shell casings before leaving and killing the power to the building, which also shut off the clock and etches in time 9:52. That's 44 minutes after that last meal of the evening was sold, and from the outside, nothing looks wrong. It gives the appearance of a closed restaurant and nothing amiss. Then the fellers walked to their car they had parked in the shopping center behind the restaurant, being careful not to leave a trail in the snow. They would then drive off, ditching their bloodied clothes in a trash can somewhere along their way. Then they would chunk the .38 caliber gun into the Fox River Dam. They then called a gal, Eileen, telling her that they did something big, and she had to come meet them in a parking lot.
How old are the boys? Like older teens, like 19, 20?
Yeah, they graduated.
I don't understand the kids that commit crimes like this and then have to go brag about it.
I don't know.
Like, what's the purpose in being so careful if you're just going to turn around and blab?
I don't know. So that your small circle of people think you're amazing or are scared of you and feed off of that power. But she meets them out there. They give her directions to where they're at. She claims to see latex gloves on the console of Juan's car as Juan and Jim get out and bring a bag with them. Then she drives them to her townhouse where they would smoke pot and count the money out of the bag that they brought with them. Now, Eileen would get $50 because Jim had borrowed money from her, so that's him paying her back, that she would later use to buy some new shoes.
Typical girl.
Jim and Juan would split the rest. Then in the morning, Eileen drops Juan back off at his car, and Jim asks that they drive past the Browns restaurant, and they do, and at that point, there's a ton of emergency vehicles in a crowd, and that's when Eileen says that Jim told her that more than just a robbery had occurred. The two didn't seem to care that people were dead at the restaurant as a result of their actions, and Juan didn't care that he actually knew some of the people that were now dead.
That's sick.
Eventually, Anne and Jim would break up, but not for a while later. In 1994.
She has issues as well.
Right. So if I found out my boyfriend in high school murdered people, I wouldn't just, well, let's keep dating. I'll keep the secret.
I can't even guarantee. Well, I can't guarantee. I wouldn't for Jason either. If he told me he just went in and murdered a bunch of people, I'd be like, yeah, I know I said till death do we part, but apparently you're going to be getting the electric chair pretty soon.
Well, and
sorry,
they call it quits in 94, but he'll keep calling her, well, her mom's house and her. She would move to Oregon and go to college, and Jim would still call every now and then looking for her. Fast forward to 2001, and she would tell her then boyfriend about the murders, and they would discuss whether or not she should call the police or not, if that would compromise her safety, because what if they don't take her seriously, and then the boys find out, and then she's murdered, that whole thing, even though she's not even in the same state anymore.
Yeah, that's pretty stupid logic.
So then they decide maybe just send an anonymous letter, that way they can start looking in on them, but don't necessarily know who tattled.
Right.
Then she would tell her mom about it, that way she could understand the seriousness of Jim not knowing where she is. Well, so that's where maybe the mom had a good relationship or a chit-chatty relationship with Jim. So when he would call, she would probably give him the update, ask how he's doing, that whole thing. And he would call every now and then just checking in. And she didn't like that he's still calling and that her mother is giving him information. So she would tell the mom about it. That way she understood the severity of shut the fuck up.
I hope she did. I hope it's not like our mother where it was like, oh, he didn't do that.
I don't know. Then, so Anne and her then boyfriend decide that she should do that anonymous letter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Anne would call an old high school pal, wanting her to drop the letter off, initially not wanting her to know what was in the letter, but the friend eventually coaxes it out of her, and Anne would tell the friend the story, and the friend would be like, dude, I know somebody on the police force, why don't I just set you guys up to talk, and you tell your story to them? I mean, and I know this person, they're trustworthy. And Anne is like, okay, fine, you've convinced me, I won't do the letter, I'll talk to somebody. Now, she would do just that, and that's what kicks off the investigation of looking into Jim and Juan. Lead number 4,842.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. And it's the one everyone's waiting for. And with Anne coming forward, that's what leads them to talking to Elaine Bakalawala. It's Bakalla. I don't know how to say her name. I've never in my life seen a last name that's that one. It could be made up. I don't know. But we're going to call her Eileen because that's her name. And I know I said Elaine, but it's Eileen because I can't read at all. My apologies to that lady. But fuck, man, these names are crazy. Now, April 2002, when the police go to Jim and Juan for DNA collection, and when they test it against the chicken that they collected, and it's a real good thing that someone thought to freeze that chicken, it does come back to matching Juan. Now, it takes till May 9th to get those results back, and then they have to do their whole arrest warranty thing, and they would go arrest Juan and Jim the 16th of May. Now, Jim actually was working in Indiana, and it becomes a little bit of a stickler of sorts because they go out of state to bring him back into the state to arrest him.
I don't think you used that word right.
What?
Stickler.
I don't know. What would you call it? It becomes a hot topic, a sticking point rather,
Or a
of
sticky situation. But
they shouldn't have gone out there. He was at his work. He was apparently unloading his tools from his work truck into his main truck to go home. He would still come back in the area because he had friends and family in the area, but he was working the next state over. And I don't know if they just didn't want him to disappear, but they go and yank him when he's doing the vehicle swapping, like make a whole scene of it at his work. I imagine it was a bit embarrassing, but it's a little questionable later on of if they had the authority to do that because they're jurisdiction wise. And
yeah,
but they do. They drag him back. He's now in Illinois. I guess it's a case of it's easier to ask forgiveness.
Not really, because if they didn't have the right to arrest him, any evidence they gather after the fact becomes possibly inadmissible because they shouldn't have yanked him up when they did.
Well, they would be arrested after a good bit of interrogations and being held. Juan and Jim would both sign confessions. They would end up pleading not guilty, though, and wait for their trial to start. Naturally, they would not be granted bond because they would also say that their confessions were coerced.
Coerced?
Uh-huh. Coerced.
Like they shared a hearse?
They're not dead. So Jim would actually end up being beaten up pretty severely by a prison guard to the point that he would need surgery to fix his face hole.
Oh my gosh.
Like actual metal plates to put his skull back together. Now, the officer would say that Jim lunged at him, and it was self-defense. And Jim would say, I did not. He fucking jumped me. Jim would sue for excessive force, but that trial would be put on hold until his murder trial kicked off, which wouldn't be until 2009. Now, the trial would kick off with DNA, people testifying that they confessed to them. Then you figure they had their confessions, they had their statements of their cooperating. They even had video of confession. Then they would also, though, have testimony of two other people who also were coerced into Coerced. What'd you say? Coerced?
No, you're putting an H in there, lady.
Coerced. Coerced. Coerced.
There's no H.
Coerced.
It is in South.
There sure ain't.
It's coercion.
Oh my God.
Two other people who also were coerced into confessing for the murders, but were found that they couldn't have done it for one reason or another and were released. So it kind of gives a little bit of buy-in of how the fuck do they get so many people to confess to murders that they did not commit?
Yeah.
But anyway, when it's all said and done, it would leave both Juan and Jim being found guilty on all 7 counts of murder. Now, Juan and Jim would both get life without parole, even though the jury could have stuck them with the death penalty. That civil trial where Jim got his ass whooped by the officer, he would be awarded $500,000 in 2014, half to be paid by the county and the other half to be paid by the officer who done it. Now, mind you, the jury isn't told why someone is in jail, but I thought that was a little not fair.
Yeah.
Not that I guess the idea would be, it doesn't matter what you're in jail for, it's just you're talking about somebody who's unarmed.
Right.
The unfair side of it was, so, you know the Ellenfeld, how they bought the restaurant the girls worked at, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
They initially wanted to reopen the restaurant as a tribute to their parents, but they quickly realized that's a lot of time and effort that their parents were putting into that, and being in school and starting their lives and doing all that is more than they want to do. So they decide that they don't want to pursue that one. The landlord would actually sue the girls for back rent and costs associated with it for $655,000. The girls would end up not only losing their parents, but also their inheritance.
That landlord's a piece of garbage.
Sure fucking is.
Did they go to court?
Yeah.
And a judge sided with the landlord?
So it was against the estate.
Ugh.
Yeah, that's what I did. I don't know how that person can sleep at night, because I feel like that doesn't feel right at all.
It's just
so
disturbing.
Knowing that the girls lost a whole lot with this scenario, and then here Jim is getting $500,000, and I realize, what's he going to do with it in jail? Like, they can only use so much per day at the commissary. But it feels wrong that he has anything.
It is wrong that he has anything.
So, mind you, during all of this, Jim is still in jail saying he's innocent, and that his confession and testimony, and the testimony of everyone, they're all liars. and that his
Yeah.
public defender was trash, and every time he gave him some sort of like, hey, this is really what happened, he wouldn't call anybody to the stand or anything. And he has a whole website that, this is what I was telling you I was struggling with this case, is you figure you have other people that the police department was able to get false confessions from. That bothers me.
Mm-hmm.
Juan apparently was threatened with, they were going to deport his entire family. So that's why he signed his cooperation and all that,
Mm-hmm.
because he just wanted it to stop. It was really long. It was 48 hours of them being like independently threatened. And Jim would say he really had to poop and he has a fear of public bathrooms.
I thought you were going to say a fear of shitting his pants. I was like, all
No,
right.
he also has an asthma problem, and they would not let him bring his inhaler when they arrested him. And now, I do like police officers. I like to think the majority of them are good, honest, hardworking people who just want to do the right thing. But I do also know that in every profession, there are pieces of shit. And part of me goes on the side of, what are they doing that they got other people to confess falsely when they held them for 48 hours? And also, they didn't record any of the interrogations, only like a few minutes of their confession, which is regurgitated.
Well, back in the 90s, they didn't have to record the interrogations.
I know.
But all these false confessions are the reason why they started recording it.
Yeah. But they specifically turned it off. So part of me does the whole, that seems like this might be a thing. And Jim would even say the only reason he agreed to record the video, and they had to do 2 takes, which is like because he didn't say it right.
All right.
So it's just like, all right. But he said the only reason he did that is he wanted them to stop. He wanted to go to sleep. He wanted it all to go away. And he figured that he believed in the justice system and that he couldn't be found guilty of a crime that he didn't do. So he just signed whatever to be able to. He wasn't able to have a phone call during that 48 hours. Like, he wasn't allowed to sleep because they kept having people come in. Like,
But what about the girl that's claiming that she was part of all that nonsense? You're saying she lied?
I'm glad you brought that up, because the night Anne was supposedly got a phone call from Jim, she was actually in a psych hospital getting treatment because she was suicidal. And since she was on suicide watch, she wasn't allowed to have any phone calls. Not only that, she couldn't even watch TV for to have seen it there either. And she wouldn't be released for a few days afterwards, which could be still he was confessed to, but she didn't get a phone call. Certainly not that night. And not only that, but the DNA at the crime scene, they never found anything that tied Jim to there. They just found DNA that matched one and figured, because they were thicker than thieves, that if one did it, so did the other, because you didn't see one without the other.
And that's where that expression, you are who you hang out with, really comes to
Fucking-
play.
I thought that when I was reading this one, of like, and this is what happens when it's like a case of you are who you hang with. If they couldn't trace either one to it, I don't think they would have arrested either one. But it's also possible the whole, I don't understand the whole thing, because it seems like a leap of just because you had chicken there doesn't mean you murdered anyone.
No, they're basing everything off of her saying that. What about that's the same chick that bought the shoes?
No, that was the other one.
What about her?
I'm glad you asked. So Anne's motivation was, they put up a $240,000 reward thing up. So that was motivation for her, right? Now, apparently when she first went to the police officers, she tried to pin it on a different ex-boyfriend first.
Okay.
Allegedly. I was like, whoa.
These women need to go to jail too, okay? Throw them in the clink, because they are pieces of shit. You can't just point a finger because you want a payday.
Mm-hmm. Now, that's something the jury never heard about, because the public defender didn't throw any of that out there. And also, Eileen was in the midst of drug charges that magically went away after her cooperation.
Ugh. Okay.
That's why I said this one I struggle with a lot, and I have my opinions, but I do feel like this one is shady. And I feel bad because there are 7 people dead, and that means potentially there is no justice done. And when I first started doing this case, because this was one that was suggested by one of our listeners, the more I read and the more I dug into, because mind you, I did read some of Jim's website, but I also know that there's plenty of people who will say they're innocent and they did it. But then I also know that there are some people who are legitimately innocent and are just stupid. And I don't know which one he falls into. But I can tell you, it seems like he did not get a fair shake. And I think just on the side of the fact that that police department had a little bit of a pattern going of false confessions, I think it needs another look-see.
Wow. This was the case that chick Paulina suggested, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Which, thank you for that mindfuckery.
Yeah. I guess now you're the fast food killer.
I know. Well, I can tell you, when I first read it and before I started reading into it, I was wildly confused at all of the things.
Can't imagine why.
I also thought it was disgusting, and there's a lot of people who were upset that she waited as long as she did to come forward, but it was only when there was a reward. I also thought it was a little suspicious that you would think if something that big happened, you would have told somebody. Like, I would have told my best friend of like, hey, my boyfriend just said he did some shit, or I thought he did some shit. But she didn't tell anybody, and then when he was calling her house, why didn't she tell her mother all the other times? And then there's plenty of people who have a problem with that, and that she got any reward money.
Yeah.
And the other side of that, so the shoe that they found that was whatever size, 12 to 14, Jim was a size 11. So they would actually come to jail twice to print his feet, or like one barefoot. Then they would try every shoe that he ever had. They couldn't find any shoe that came anywhere close. So that's kind of one reason it's not really brought up in trial. But then they also have the issue when they have people coming in and out of the restaurant, they basically fucked the crime scene from one end to the other because they had so many people in and out of there. So they kind of botched the crime scene in itself. So there's that. But I don't know how I feel. I just am not 100% they have the right somebody. He might not have been a good person, but that doesn't mean you should have something pinned on you. And I feel like if it's not him, then that means somebody did it and they're out there. Not only that, but there was a small sliver. There were a few other robberies, not massacres, mind you, at other fast food restaurants near this restaurant.
It makes me wonder. So this was a lot of information, but how much time went between the massacre to them being arrested? Years, right?
10. It was almost a decade.
So there's still a chance that they committed those other robberies, but it's possible when they went to rob that restaurant in particular, because the one feller was known by some of the employees, that's why it became a massacre.
Oh.
Because they were going to get caught. You know what I mean?
There was another little tidbit on Jim's website, and now mind you, take this with a grain of salt, because I don't know. I mean, you can lie and say stuff online all you want to, but he also said that clock in the restaurant, one of his friends, or I forget how he found out, that clock had been broken for years. So it didn't mark the time that everything happened or when the lights were flicked off. The clock was fucking broken. Whether the circuit breaker was open or not, the face to the clock actually had a crack in it. That it was a broken clock.
We know from the time the boy's father showed up there, all the shit was cut off already. So
somewhere in between there.
Even if it wasn't the exact time, it's pretty close.
Yeah. But that's where I said it just is what you want to believe. And then also he was trying to, in his hope with appeals and such, that since everything is hinged on those 2 gals, is that she didn't get that phone call. They can prove that she was lying there. But then it makes it difficult because had this occurred when it was all fresh, he would have been able to get people who remember where he was or when they saw him or if they saw his car.
Details.
Yeah.
Important details.
But waiting 10 years later, you've got nobody to be like, hey, did you see my car over in this area at this time? Because this asshole's saying they did.
Yeah.
And I think it's mighty suspicious that you come forward when there's a payday.
How much time did they get?
Life without parole.
Both of them?
Yeah.
Mm.
But again, that I think the fact that you've got other false confessions to the same crime.
Yeah. How do you weed through? So just because he didn't finish his sandwich, they're in jail.
Yeah, exactly. Because nothing else ties them to that, which to me,
That's pretty weak.
that seems... If you were to do another trial and throw out the false confessions, because I feel like those should be thrown out since they have others to dispute, like this isn't legitimate. They've got nothing else.
Yeah.
They actually even had somebody who saw someone near the restaurant around that time who was described as like 5'5" and chubby or rotund, which didn't fit those two at all. So it's shadow of a doubt enough.
Yeah.
Dude, so another like point he wanted to make in his little website thingamajig was that he couldn't have done it because he also was a drug dealer at that time and he had plenty of money, so that motivation wasn't a thing.
I love when they admit to a crime to get out of another crime. And I guess, granted, murder as opposed to drug dealing, if you're given the two options, I guess drug dealing is the lesser of two evils. I guess.
Well, you know how I told you, like, when they were talking to Eileen and she said that he owed her $50 and he paid her $50 back out of that wad of money that he got out of the bag?
Mm-hmm.
That was like the whole, he borrowed money from her. So that was his thing of like, yeah, that's not true. I wouldn't have borrowed money from her. I had money. Not only that, I wasn't hurting for money, so it wouldn't have been like, yeah, let's go do this.
It's a good excuse, I guess.
And that's where it's just like the whole thing, it sounds like he did it, but then if you... It does sound suspicious when it's like she waited a really long time to come forward. And I think it's real suspicious if it was once the reward got to a certain amount or once she was desperate enough. And the fact that the other gal has drug problems.
Yeah.
It's just like, they don't sound like the most straight and narrow of people.
Or the most stable.
And if you remove both of those two's testimony,
they ain't got nothing.
Yeah, there's nothing to keep him in jail.
I know it has nothing to do with your case, and I like to do this apparently.
You do.
But I was watching a show, one of them murder shows. Long story short, after they caught the bad guy, they did connect him to several, I think it was like 4 murders. And then there were several more that they wanted to connect the guy to because it fit his MO. But because they happened back in the 90s, all the way through the 2000s, they didn't have evidence on these people. They didn't even have people. They were missing people.
Mm-hmm.
And they said this one girl that had gone missing, they interviewed some woman. Now, mind you, it's been 29 years since this girl went missing. This store owner who claims that she remembers that specific young lady coming in with a man who fit the description of the guy that was arrested and pinned with all the other murders.
Does she remember after he was arrested?
Yeah.
Is it possible she's just real good at the imagination in?
Yeah. And she said that it was suspicious 29 years ago, but she didn't report anything 29 years ago. And then she also didn't report anything a few years later when they tried to keep the case alive to try to find information. She only magically remembered that this girl and the guy came into her store. The girl seemed uncomfortable and the guy had her, like his arm around her, keeping her close to him and like all the suspicious stuff. And then she sat down with the sketch artist. Mind you, the actual feller has already been in the news, has gone to court a whole bunch.
Yeah, she already knows what he looks like.
Yeah, and then she's just like, it looked like him, but with a wig on. And then what it was he balded. I'm sitting there and it's like, I don't know how the police can trust that.
Yeah.
I felt bad because her dad died and never knowing, like, she's still a missing person.
Yeah, those ones really mess with me. The family will never have any closure.
Yeah.
But so there's the other side of it where, like, when we've done cases where they'll try to pin a bunch of other cases on one feller because they'll be like, he had to have done it. Like that one dude that he killed somebody and threw her in a ditch.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were trying to connect everybody within any sort of reasonable vicinity that was dead in a ditch to him. And then it turned out there were 3 separate people doing the murderings in that roundabout area.
Yeah.
Strangely, I don't remember what area that was because I'm pretty sure I put it on my do not go to list.
But to tie it back to your case, I don't understand how the police, I think they're just so desperate to get a conviction and they really truly believe that that person's guilty. So they use some shoddy testimony that you can poke holes in.
Well, so I don't even think that they're necessarily, they know they're guilty. They know that they're not good people. And I would say that these fellers weren't living the bestest life. But that doesn't mean you can pin it to them, because that also means...
If it's not them, the killer's still out there?
Yes! I'm like, well, let's not... That seems like the biggest bone of contention in this.
Yeah. And that's a big bone.
We can end it on that. Because that's funny. That's the best way to end it, because then I can just hear our outro of thank you for listening.
You're welcome.
That was beautiful.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Homicide Hobbies. If we made you laugh, if we made you cry, or if we mindfucked you for the day, then we thank you for listening. Please write a review on whatever you're listening to us on. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers. We're freaking awesome. And join us next week for another episode of Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy.
And I'm Claire.
That's all we've got.